Earworms. What are they and why do we have them? By Sam Adams. Everyone has had times when they're walking down the street, or sitting alone in the quiet room, or working through a deep train of thought, and a song or melody has suddenly sprung unbidden into their mind. Sometimes it's just a few notes, sometimes it's a full blown song. It may be a song that he or she has just heard on the radio a few minutes before, or it may be a song they have not heard for years. Maybe they only know the song from an advertisement and it was never meant to be a commercial success at all. Maybe it was on the top 40 charts. There seems to be no rhyme or reason to what songs come into one's head. Or is there? Research shows that some songs and melodies have characteristics and mental associations that cause them to become examples of involuntary musical imagery, commonly called earworms. To begin to understand involuntary musical imagery, it's necessary to define it. A journal article dissecting an earworm, melodic features, and song popularity predict involuntary musical imagery defines involuntary musical imagery as the spontaneous recall and repeating of a tune in one's mind. In other words, it is the phenomenon when a song comes to a person's mind without them consciously trying to remember it, and then is then repeated, in part or in whole, without their conscious control. Similar to the scenario described above, this phenomenon generally happens without warning and can seem to be disconnected from any stimuli around the time it occurs. With this definition in mind, the question can now be asked, why? Why do these particular songs and melodies get stuck in a person's head? Are there certain characteristics that cause this to happen? Are humans programmed to file away melodies in their brains to be recalled later? As for the last question, there is some indication that this actually is the case. According to the book This Is Your Brain on Music by Daniel Levitin, music is one of the few human experiences that activates areas around the entirety of the brain. In fact, though it used to be thought that music was a right brain activity, scientists now know that different elements of music are actually processed in different areas of the brain and come together later to be understood as a cohesive whole. Levitin, who is a scientist himself, states that in his research with brain scans of people listening to music, he has seen the different parts of their brains activate as they process rhythm, dynamics, pitch, and timbre. The people who he was observing were not performing on instruments, and they were not all musicians. This means that everyone's brain has the capability of inputting, processing, storing, and exporting musical ideas. Indeed, even to hear and comprehend music means that nearly the entire brain has been used to process the incoming signal. It's little wonder then that songs seem to be able to be stored and recalled so easily, even without a conscious effort. Levitin also discusses how a person's brain groups sounds in an effort to make fast decisions when it's confronted with new stimuli. When sounds pass through a person's eardrums, the vibrations are turned into electrical impulses in the brain, which are then used to trigger several neurons at once. The neurons triggered depend on the characteristics of the sound. If the sound is a car horn, the neurons for that trigger may be danger and may be activated, because people have come to associate that sound with possible danger. If the sound is a child laughing, neurons for happy may trigger and the people may smile to themselves. These sounds are characterized based on timbral cues, such as loudness or harshness, but also by association, or what they have come to represent to the listener. Levitin and others have found that no matter what sound is heard, at least a small part of the memory section of one's brain is triggered to try to categorize the sound based on past experiences. Importantly, he also found that when humans hear sound, the emotional center of the brain is triggered, almost simultaneously with the memory center. The center of emotion is the same region of the brain where dopamine is released. Dopamine is the chemical in the brain that causes a feeling of pleasure in a given situation. Levitin's brain research found that when humans listen to music, the cerebellum, which is the oldest part of the brain scientifically, becomes involved immediately and begins releasing dopamine as it reacts and adjusts to the music. It releases dopamine in response to the stimuli and makes people feel good. To the brain, music is a reward and something that is to be enjoyed, even as it's unconsciously analyzed and interpreted. This means that humans often learn to associate sounds with both memories and emotions all at once. These connections therefore run deeper than just remembering a certain sound. When a person hears music that he or she likes, they make a memory and emotional connection. People are often able to remember where they were when they heard a particular song, and that memory is nearly always connected to a general feeling of that experience. An elderly couple may remember the song that was playing the first time they met, and they might smile when they hear that song. A teenager might hear a song that reminds them of a friend who moved away, and they might feel sadness or loneliness. The memories are tied to the emotions. This is what causes music to have such a deep impact on humans, and why people are able to connect with it on a full brain level. However, that does not fully explain why some songs are able to pop into one's head seemingly at random and repeat without one's control. To help explain this part of the phenomenon, one must understand that there are some characteristics found in music that humans find pleasing and easy to remember. Some of these characteristics manifest themselves in the kinds of music that are popular in the culture at the moment. Some of these characteristics are more long-lasting, and examples of them can be seen in music that's been produced for hundreds of years. Elements of rhythms, melodic movement, and instrument timbre have always been used by composers to create pieces of music that are pleasant and memorable to listeners. The melodies are crafted using time-tested patterns, subject matters, instruments, and even snippets of other previously successful melodies. For example, the melody to Rain, Rain, Go Away starts on the fifth note of the scale, which can be called sol, and then drops to the third note of the scale, or mi. The full pattern is sol, mi, sol, sol, mi, sol, sol, mi, sol, sol, mi. Many researchers in early childhood psychology suggest these are the first two pitches that children are able to audiate, which is the process of hearing musical notes in one's head without first playing them on an instrument. As children progress and their brains develop, they begin to add more notes to their musical repertoire and are able to make up more complex songs. Using the same example of Rain, Rain, Go Away, the next step would be for the child to replace one of the sol notes with a note on the sixth degree of the scale, or la. The full pattern would then be sol, mi, sol, sol, mi, sol, sol, mi, la, sol, sol, mi. This does not seem like a huge difference to just add one note to a mental scale. However, if a child were to just use the first two notes, there are basically two ways they could combine them: mi, sol, or sol, mi. By just adding a third note, the child has already tripled the number of possible permutations to 6. Mi, sol, la, mi, la, sol, mi, la, mi, sol, la, mi, and sol, mi, la. When the child adds a fourth note, suddenly there are 24 possible permutations. Now consider that in the Western scale of music, there are basically 12 pitches. If a child grows to be a master musician and can audiate the entire chromatic scale in their head, suddenly they have an impressive catalog of 479,001,600 permutations. Also keep in mind that this number only considers using each note once in each permutation, and does not allow for the very real musical possibility of a note being repeated any number of times in a pattern. Each of these permutations provides an opportunity to form a new connection and memory and emotion when heard. One must also realize that humans are inherently given to movement when listening to music. Levitin gives an anecdote in his book about a scientist who went to study the music of a tribe in Africa. As he got to know the tribe, they wanted to teach him one of their songs and began showing him the dance that went with the song. The scientist told him that he didn't dance, so he could not learn that. The tribe was confused by this, because for them, dance and music were the same. The word for music in their native language was actually the same as the word for dance, so it was impossible for them to have one without the other. People in Western cultures tend to leave dancing and performing music to the, quote, experts. But in most cultures, that's not the case. A study by Beatrice Ilari found that even infants showed more spontaneous movement when hearing music than they did when hearing regular voices or sounds. Humans are wired to move in response to rhythm and melodies that the brain tell them are pleasurable. This movement, from a scientific perspective, activates even more of the brain because of the motor cortex being used to move. With the movement, emotional, analytical, and pleasure centers of the brain all being activated at once by the same stimuli, music can become as powerful of a reward and motivation as many drugs. In the article Psychology of Music, the author discovers how music affects the psychology of humans in areas including performing, memorizing, analyzing, and learning. They study people across their lives and in many social contexts, and they discover that music seems to elicit strong emotion more reliable and frequently than other arts. The researchers believe this is due in part to the way music happens over a function of time, unlike other arts which need to be experienced or seen all at once. They also link these deep emotions to being some of the more primitive and fundamental experiences of life as humans. In other words, humans have a strong reaction and connection to music, and it speaks to them on a very deep level. When people hear music, there are often parts of the music that connect with the listener and engage not only the physical aspects of their brains, as discussed earlier, but the emotional centers as well. The music triggers feelings that could also be linked to other memories or experiences, which in turn can be linked to others. This causes the act of listening to music to not just be a singular act of hearing, but a physical and emotional act that engages the brain in the present tense, as well as the memories that have been formed in the past. The earworms in songs that get stuck in a person's brain are short extensions of this physical and emotional phenomenon. Our brains spontaneously recall songs or parts of songs they find pleasurable, and sometimes loop them without our ability to stop it. It's almost as if the brain needs a hit of dopamine and has learned to get it through music. Although the person may not believe in every case that they have a strong emotional connection to the song or melody, the connection is strong enough in their brain that's often recalled and repeated without warning or control. While the full extent to which music affects human brains is not yet known, research has proven that everyone is affected by music to different degrees. Often, this is on a deeply emotional level in addition to the ever present physical reactions of the brain. However, with involuntary musical imagery, this concept goes a step further, and the brain seems to take control of the process by recalling and remembering music. It is important that researchers continue to work to understand this phenomenon and to see how this evolving understanding of music's effect on people can help them better understand the human mind.